Welcome to Sinister States.
It starts with a flicker in the dark, a creak on the stairs, the hush of wind against a window pane, or the sudden, inexplicable chill that runs down your spine when you're alone at night. Fear is one of the oldest, most primal emotions we know. It's the reason our ancestors survived the night, the reason we jump at shadows, the reason our hearts race when we hear a story that's just a little too close to home. But here's the paradox. While fear is designed to protect us, we seek it out. We pay for it. We crave it. We line up for haunted houses. We turn off the lights to watch horror movies. We read stories that promise to unsettle us. And we share urban legends that make us check under the bed before we sleep. Why? Why do we love horror? To answer that, we have to go back, way back. Imagine a world before electricity, before cities, before the internet. Night falls, and the world shrinks to the circle of firelight. Beyond that, the dark is absolute. Every sound is amplified, every shadow is a threat. In that world, fear isn't just an emotion, it's a survival tool. The people who paid attention to their fear, who listened to the snap of a twig or the growl in the distance, were the ones who lived to see another sunrise. Fear kept us alive, but as the world changed, so did our relationship with fear. The threats became less immediate, less physical. The saber-toothed cats and wolves at the edge of the firelight gave way to the anxieties of modern life. Deadlines, social pressures, existential dread. Yet the machinery of fear, the adrenaline, the racing heart, the urge to run, remained. And so, we found new ways to trigger it. We invented stories. Storytelling is humanity's oldest technology. Before we had written language, we had tales told around the fire. And what were those stories about? Monsters, ghosts, the things that lurked in the dark. These stories served a purpose. They taught us what to fear and how to survive. They were warnings, but they were also entertainment. They let us experience fear in a controlled way, from the safety of the firelight. Fast forward to today, and the tradition continues. Horror is one of the most enduring genres in human culture. From ancient myths to modern movies, from campfire tales to best-selling novels, we keep coming back to the things that scare us. But the question remains, why? What is it about fear that draws us in, even as it makes us want to look away? To understand that, we need to look at the psychology of fear. At its core, fear is a response to threat. It's the body's way of saying, pay attention, something's not right. When we're afraid, our brains release a cocktail of chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, that prepare us to fight, flee, or freeze. Our senses sharpen, our hearts pound, our muscles tense. It's an ancient system, hardwired into our DNA. But here's where it gets interesting. When we know we're safe, those same chemicals can feel exhilarating. Think about the last time you watched a scary movie. You knew, rationally, that you were in no real danger. But your body didn't care. Your heart still raced, your palms still sweated, your breath still caught in your throat. And when the credits rolled, you felt a rush of relief, a kind of euphoria. That's the paradox of horror. It lets us experience fear without risk. It's a roller coaster for the mind. This is what psychologists call benign masochism, the enjoyment of negative emotions in a safe context. It's the same reason we eat spicy food, ride roller coasters, or listen to sad music. We like to flirt with danger, to push our limits, to feel something intense. Horror gives us that in spades, but it's not just about the thrill. Horror also serves deeper psychological needs. For one, it gives us a way to confront our anxieties. The monsters in horror stories are often metaphors for real-world fears: death, disease, the unknown, the loss of control. By facing these fears in fiction, we can process them in a way that feels manageable. It's a kind of rehearsal for the real thing. When we see characters survive the unimaginable, it gives us hope that we could, too. There's also a social aspect to horror. Fear is contagious. When we watch a scary movie with friends, we pick up on each other's reactions. We scream, we laugh, we clutch each other's arms. It's a bonding experience. Studies have shown that shared fear can bring people closer together, creating a sense of camaraderie and trust. It's no accident that horror movies are a popular choice for first dates. But let's not forget the artistry of horror. The best horror stories aren't just about jump scares or gore. They're about atmosphere, suspense, and the slow build of dread. They play with our expectations, subvert our assumptions, and force us to question what we think we know. They tap into universal fears, but they also reflect the anxieties of their time. The monsters change, but the feeling stays the same. Take, for example, the classic haunted house story. On the surface, it's about ghosts and things that go bump in the night. But dig a little deeper, and it's often about something more. The fear of the past, the weight of family secrets, the anxiety of change. The house becomes a metaphor for the mind, a place where memories linger, where trauma festers, where the walls themselves seem to breathe. The best horror stories work on multiple levels, inviting us to explore not just what scares us, but why. And then there's the question of control. In real life, fear is often overwhelming. It can paralyze us, make us feel helpless. But in horror, we're in the driver's seat. We can close the book, turn off the movie, leave the haunted house whenever we want. We get to decide how much fear we can handle. That sense of agency is powerful. It lets us flirt with danger without losing control. Of course, not everyone loves horror. For some, the experience is too intense, too real. And that's okay. Our tolerance for fear is shaped by a mix of biology, personality, and experience. Some people are more sensitive to threat, more prone to anxiety. Others are thrill seekers, always chasing the next adrenaline rush. There's no right or wrong way to feel about horror. But for those who do love it, the appeal is undeniable. Let's look at some of the science behind this. Studies have shown that people who enjoy horror tend to score higher on measures of sensation seeking, a personality trait characterized by the desire for novel and intense experiences. They're more likely to enjoy roller coasters, extreme sports, and other high-arousal activities. But it's not just about thrill-seeking. Horror fans also tend to be more open to new experiences, more curious about the world, and more comfortable with ambiguity. Interestingly, horror can also be a way to build resilience. When we expose ourselves to fear in a controlled setting, we learn to manage our reactions. We practice calming ourselves down, reminding ourselves that it's just a story, just a movie, just a game. Over time, this can make us more confident in our ability to handle real-world stress. It's a kind of emotional training ground. But horror isn't just about individual psychology. It's also a reflection of culture. The monsters we fear change with the times. In the 1950s, it was aliens and nuclear mutants, anxieties about the Cold War and the atomic age. In the 1970s, it was serial killers and demonic possession, fears about social upheaval and the loss of traditional values. Today, our horror stories are filled with pandemics, technology gone wrong, and the collapse of society. Horror is a mirror, reflecting our deepest anxieties back at us. And yet, even as the monsters change, the experience of fear remains the same. It's universal. Every culture has its own horror stories, its own legends of ghosts, demons, and things that go bump in the night. These stories serve a purpose. They help us make sense of the unknown, to put a face to our fears, to give us a sense of control over the uncontrollable. But what about the people who create horror? The writers, directors, and artists who spend their lives dreaming up nightmares? For them, horror is a way to explore the boundaries of imagination, to push the limits of what's possible. It's a form of play, a way to experiment with ideas, to test the rules of reality, to see what happens when you break them. Horror creators are often some of the most imaginative, empathetic people you'll meet. They understand that fear is a powerful tool, and they use it to tell stories that stick with us long after the lights come back on. Of course, not all horror is created equal. There's a difference between cheap scares and true terror. The best horror doesn't just startle us, it unsettles us. It lingers. It makes us question what we thought we knew. It forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. That's why the classics endure, because they tap into something deep and universal. So why do we love horror? Because it lets us feel alive. Because it gives us a safe space to explore our fears. Because it brings us together. Because it challenges us, excites us, and reminds us that, no matter how civilized we become, there's still a part of us that listens for the sound in the dark. But maybe, just maybe, there's something more. Maybe we love horror because it tells us the truth, that the world is unpredictable, that danger is real, that life is fragile. And in facing that truth, even for a moment, we find a kind of freedom. We remember what it means to be human. As we move deeper into the psychology of fear, let's explore the different types of horror that captivate us, and how each one taps into a unique aspect of our psyche. From the supernatural to the psychological, from the grotesque to the uncanny, horror wears many masks. Each one reveals something different about who we are and what we fear most. But before we do, let's pause and consider. When was the last time you were truly afraid? Not startled, not surprised, but genuinely unsettled? What was it that got under your skin? Was it a story, a movie, a memory, a dream? Hold on to that feeling, because as we journey further into the world of horror, we'll be coming back to it again and again. Let's step into the shadows and examine the many faces of horror. If fear is a universal language, then horror is its poetry, sometimes subtle, sometimes brutal, always speaking to something deep inside us. But not all horror is created equal. The stories that haunt us most are the ones that tap into our most personal, private anxieties. To understand why we love horror, we need to look at the different forms it takes and how each one works its particular magic on our minds. First, there's the supernatural. Ghosts, demons, vampires, werewolves, creatures that defy the laws of nature and remind us that the world is bigger, stranger, and more mysterious than we can ever know. Supernatural horror is about the unknown, the things that science can't explain. It's about the fear that there's something out there, just beyond the edge of the light, watching us. This kind of horror is ancient. Every culture has its own stories of spirits and monsters, passed down through generations. These tales serve as warnings, but also as comfort. If the world is full of mysteries, then maybe there's more to life than what we see. Supernatural horror is also about boundaries between life and death, sanity and madness, the real and the unreal. When we watch a ghost story or read about a haunted house, we're not just afraid of the ghost, we're afraid of what it represents. The past that won't stay buried, the guilt that won't let go, the secrets that refuse to die. The supernatural is a metaphor for everything we can't control or understand. And in facing it, we confront the limits of our own knowledge. Then there's psychological horror. This is the horror of the mind, the fear that comes from within. It's about paranoia, obsession, madness. It's about the realization that the real monster might be us. Psychological horror is subtle, insidious. It creeps up on you, planting seeds of doubt and unease. It makes you question your own perceptions, your own sanity. Think of films like Psycho or Black Swan, or novels like The Shining. These stories don't rely on monsters or gore. They rely on atmosphere, ambiguity, and the slow unraveling of the self. Psychological horror is powerful because it's personal. We all have fears we can't name, anxieties we can't shake. The best psychological horror taps into those fears, making us complicit in our own terror. It's the fear of losing control, of becoming someone we don't recognize. It's the fear that the real danger isn't out there, but inside our own heads. Next, we have body horror, the fear of physical transformation, mutilation, or decay. This is the horror of the flesh, the terror that our bodies can betray us. Body horror is visceral, graphic, and often deeply unsettling. It plays on our anxieties about illness, injury, and mortality. Films like The Fly or The Thing are classics of the genre, showing us what happens when the boundaries of the body are violated. But body horror isn't just about gore. It's about identity. Our bodies are central to who we are, and when they change in ways we can't control, it threatens our sense of self. Body horror forces us to confront the fragility of our own existence, the fact that we are, in the end, just meat and bone. It's a reminder that death is not just an abstract concept, but a physical reality. Then there's the uncanny, the horror of the familiar made strange. The uncanny is about things that are almost normal, but not quite. It's the doll that looks too lifelike, the reflection that moves when you don't, the house that feels just a little bit off. The uncanny taps into our deepest sense of unease, the feeling that something is wrong, but we can't say what. Sigmund Freud called this the return of the repressed, the idea that the things we try to ignore or forget come back to haunt us in unexpected ways. Uncanny horror is subtle, but it lingers. It's the reason we're unsettled by mannequins, clowns, or empty playgrounds at night. It's the fear that the world isn't as stable or predictable as we want it to be. The uncanny reminds us that reality is fragile and that the line between normal and abnormal is thinner than we think. Of course, there's also the horror of the monstrous, the fear of creatures that are wholly other, that defy categorization. Monsters are a staple of horror, from Frankenstein's creation to Godzilla to the xenomorph in Alien. Monsters represent our fear of the unknown, but also our fascination with it. They are the embodiment of everything we can't explain or control. But monsters are more than just threats. They're also mirrors. They reflect our own fears and desires back at us. The vampire is seductive and dangerous, a symbol of forbidden desire. The zombie is mindless and relentless, a metaphor for conformity or contagion. The werewolf is a person transformed by rage or instinct, a reminder that we all have a beast inside us. Monsters let us explore the parts of ourselves we'd rather not admit exist. And then there's the horror of the real, the fear that comes from true stories, from the darkness in human nature. Serial killers, home invasions, cults, disasters. This kind of horror is grounded in reality, and it's often the most disturbing of all. It reminds us that the world is not always safe, that evil is not just a fantasy. True crime stories, documentaries, and films based on real events tap into our fascination with the worst that humanity is capable of. But why do we seek out these different kinds of horror? What do we get from them? The answer is as varied as the stories themselves. For some, horror is a way to escape the mundane, to feel something intense and immediate. For others, it's a way to process trauma, to make sense of a chaotic world. For still others, it's a form of catharsis, a way to purge negative emotions and come out the other side feeling cleansed. Horror also gives us a sense of mastery. When we face our fears in fiction, we learn that we can survive them. We practice being brave, even if it's just for a few hours. We test our limits, and we come away stronger. This is especially true for people who have experienced real trauma. For them, horror can be a way to regain a sense of control, to confront their fears on their own terms. There's also a social dimension to horror. Watching a scary movie with friends, telling ghost stories around a campfire, playing a horror video game together. These are all ways to bond, to share an intense experience. Fear is contagious, and when we experience it together, it brings us closer. It's a way to test the boundaries of trust, to see who will scream first, who will laugh, who will hide behind a pillow. But horror isn't just about fear. It's also about curiosity. We're drawn to the unknown, to the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. Horror stories let us explore the dark corners of the world and of ourselves without having to pay the ultimate price. They let us ask, what if, in a safe, controlled environment. And sometimes, horror is just fun. There's a joy in being scared, in feeling your heart race and your skin tingle. It's a rush, a thrill, a reminder that you're alive. Horror lets us play with danger, to dance on the edge of the abyss, and then step back into the light. But not all horror is created equal. Some stories rely on cheap tricks, jump scares, gore, shock value. These can be effective in the moment, but they rarely linger. The best horror is the kind that stays with you, that makes you think, that changes the way you see the world. It's the story you can't stop thinking about, the image that flashes in your mind when you're alone in the dark. So what makes great horror? It's not just about what happens on the screen or the page. It's about what happens in your mind. Great horror is about suggestion, implication, ambiguity. It's about what you don't see, what you can't explain. It's about the questions that linger long after the story is over. Consider the power of ambiguity. When a story leaves things unexplained, it forces us to fill in the gaps with our own imagination. And our imagination is always scarier than anything a writer or director can show us. The best horror stories know this. They give us just enough to set our minds racing, and then they step back and let us do the rest. Contrast this with the horror that spells everything out, that shows us every monster, every wound, every detail. These stories can be shocking, but they rarely haunt us. The most effective horror is the kind that trusts the audience, that lets us participate in our own fear. There's also the question of empathy. The best horror stories make us care about the characters. They put us in their shoes, make us feel their fear, their hope, their desperation. When we care about the people in a story, their danger becomes our danger. Their survival becomes our victory. This is why horror is so powerful. It makes us feel deeply and viscerally. But horror can also be a tool for social commentary. Many of the greatest horror stories use fear to explore issues of race, gender, class, and power. Get Out is a brilliant example, using the conventions of horror to examine racism and exploitation. The Babadook explores grief and motherhood. Rosemary's Baby is about autonomy and control. Horror lets us talk about the things we're afraid to confront directly, to give shape to our anxieties and make them visible. And sometimes, horror is about hope. It's about survival, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit. The final girl who escapes the killer, the community that bands together to fight the monster, the hero who faces their fears and wins. These are stories of courage and strength. Horror reminds us that, even in the darkest of times, there is a way out. But perhaps the most important reason we love horror is that it reminds us of our own mortality. It forces us to confront the fact that life is fragile, that death is inevitable, that the world is full of uncertainty. In facing these truths, we find meaning. We remember what matters. We cherish the light because we have seen the dark. So the next time you find yourself drawn to a scary story, ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? Is it the monster under the bed or the one inside your own mind? Is it the unknown or the all too familiar? Is it death or the fear of not living fully? Horror gives us a way to explore these questions, to test our limits, to find out who we really are. It's not just about being scared. It's about being alive. That as we continue our journey into the psychology of fear, let's look at how horror has evolved over time and how it continues to adapt to the anxieties of each new generation. From ancient myths to modern media, horror is always changing, always finding new ways to get under our skin. Horror is a living thing. It mutates, adapts, and evolves with us, always finding new ways to tap into our deepest anxieties. To truly understand why we love horror, we have to look at how it has changed over time, how each era's monsters, stories, and scares reflect the world that created them. The history of horror is, in many ways, a history of fear itself. Let's start at the beginning. The earliest horror stories were oral traditions, myths, legends, and folktales passed down through generations. These stories were more than just entertainment, they were survival guides. The monsters in these tales, demons, witches, shapeshifters, were warnings about the dangers of the world. Don't go into the woods at night. Don't trust strangers. Don't break the rules. These stories taught us how to stay safe, but they also gave us a way to make sense of the things we couldn't control: disease, death, disaster. As societies grew more complex, so did our stories. The Gothic novel emerged in the 18th century, bringing with it a new kind of horror, one that was psychological as well as supernatural. Books like Frankenstein and Dracula weren't just about monsters. They were about the anxieties of a changing world. Science, technology, and the unknown were all sources of fear. The haunted castles and gloomy landscapes of Gothic fiction became metaphors for the mind, places where secrets and traumas lurked in the shadows. The 20th century saw horror explode into new forms. Film brought horror to life in ways that books never could. The silent era gave us Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, films that used shadow and suggestion to create an atmosphere of dread. As technology advanced, so did the scares. The universal monster movies of the 1930s, Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, turned classic literary monsters into pop culture icons. These films reflected the anxieties of their time: the fear of the outsider, the dangers of unchecked science, the threat of the unknown. But horror didn't stop there. The atomic age brought new monsters: giant insects, radioactive mutants, alien invaders. These stories were about more than just spectacle. They were about the fear of nuclear war, the anxiety of a world on the brink. The monsters of the 1950s were metaphors for the dangers of technology and the unknown consequences of human ambition. The 1960s and 70s saw horror take a darker, more psychological turn. Films like Psycho, Rosemary's Baby, and The Exorcist explored the horrors of the mind, the body, and the soul. These stories were about paranoia, possession, and the loss of control. They reflected a world in turmoil, a world grappling with social change, political unrest, and the breakdown of traditional values. The 1980s brought a new wave of horror, slasher films, body horror, and supernatural thrillers. Movies like Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and The Thing pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable on screen. These films were about survival, about the fear that danger could strike anywhere, at any time. The monsters were relentless, unstoppable, and often impossible to understand. They tapped into the anxieties of a generation growing up in a world that felt increasingly unpredictable. But horror isn't just about movies. Literature, television, video games, and even music have all played a role in shaping the genre. Stephen King's novels brought horror into the mainstream, blending supernatural terror with everyday life. Shows like The Twilight Zone and Tales from the Crypt used horror to explore moral dilemmas and social issues. Video games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill put players in the middle of the action, making fear interactive and personal. In the 21st century, horror has become more diverse and more reflective of the world we live in. The monsters have changed, but the fears remain the same. Today's horror stories grapple with technology, identity, and the collapse of social order. Films like Get Out and Hereditary use horror to explore issues of race, family, and trauma. The rise of elevated horror, films that blend art house sensibilities with genre conventions, has brought new depth and complexity to the genre. But even as horror evolves, some things never change. At its core, horror is about the unknown. It's about the things we can't explain, the dangers we can't predict, the truths we'd rather not face. Horror is a way to confront the darkness, to give shape to our fears, to find meaning in chaos. What does the future hold for horror? If history is any guide, the genre will continue to adapt, finding new ways to scare us, challenge us, and make us think. As technology advances, we may see new forms of horror, virtual reality experiences that put us inside the story, AI-generated nightmares that learn what scares us most. But no matter how the medium changes, the message will stay the same. Fear is a part of being human, and horror is how we make sense of it. But let's bring this back to the personal. Why do you love horror? Maybe it's the thrill, the adrenaline rush, the sense of mastery over your own fear. Maybe it's the way horror brings people together, the shared experience of screaming, laughing, and surviving. Maybe it's the way horror helps you process your own anxieties, giving you a safe space to confront the things that scare you most. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something deeper. Maybe you love horror because it reminds you that you're alive, that you can feel, that you can be scared, that you can survive. Horror is a celebration of life, a reminder that the darkness is only scary because the light is so precious. Let's not forget the role of the creator. The people who make horror, writers, directors, artists, are explorers of the unknown. They venture into the darkness so we don't have to, bringing back stories that help us make sense of our own fears. They are, in a way, our modern-day shamans, guiding us through the wilderness of the mind. But horror is also a conversation. It's a dialogue between creator and audience, between the story and the world. The best horror stories are the ones that invite us to participate, to question, to imagine. They don't just scare us, they challenge us to think, to feel, to grow. And that's the real power of horror. It's not just about fear, it's about transformation. Horror changes us. It forces us to confront the things we'd rather ignore, to face the darkness and come out the other side stronger. It teaches us empathy, resilience, and courage. It reminds us that, no matter how scary the world may seem, we are not alone. So the next time you find yourself drawn to a scary story, remember, you're not just seeking a thrill. You're participating in a tradition as old as humanity itself. You're exploring the boundaries of your own mind, testing your limits, and discovering what it means to be alive. And if you ever find yourself wondering why you love horror, just listen to your heart. Feel it race, feel it pound, feel the adrenaline surge through your veins. That's the feeling of being alive. That's the gift of fear. But let's not end here. Let's look at how horror can be a force for good. In a world that often feels overwhelming, horror gives us a way to process our anxieties, to find meaning in chaos, to connect with others. It teaches us that it's okay to be afraid, that fear is a natural part of life. It shows us that, even in the darkest of times, there is hope. Horror also teaches us empathy. When we see characters struggle, suffer, and survive, we learn to care about people who are different from us. We learn to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to imagine what it would be like to face the unimaginable. Horror makes us more human. And finally, horror gives us a sense of agency. In a world where so much is out of our control, Horror lets us choose our own adventure. We decide how much fear we can handle, when to turn off the lights, when to walk away. We are the masters of our own fear. So embrace the darkness. Celebrate the unknown. Let yourself be scared, and let yourself be changed. Because in the end, that's what horror is all about. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the psychology of fear. Whether you're a lifelong horror fan or just curious about what makes the genre tick, I hope you found something here that resonates with you. Remember, fear is not the enemy. It's a part of who we are. And by facing it, we become stronger, braver, and more alive. So the next time you hear a creak in the dark or feel a chill run down your spine, don't be afraid. Smile. You're part of a tradition that goes back thousands of years, a tradition of facing the unknown, of telling stories, of finding meaning in the darkness. That's the real reason we love horror, because it reminds us that no matter how scary the world may seem, we are never truly alone.